So today's episode, I usually plan, I don't think I've ever spoken about the process in which I film, record, plan, all of this for the Female Genius episodes because they do take a lot of planning. They feel very unstructured, and that is the desire. They feel very like, oh my God, she's just saying things, whatever comes to mind, and blah, 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 blah. But a lot of the time, it does have a specific structure. And if you listen to all of the episodes, you will start to see a very common theme. I open up with something super duper random, which introduces the topic a little bit. I kind of give a background on the topic and why I want to speak about it. I talk about some research. I give some definitions. I give basically posit the topic within scientific understanding or anything like that. And then I talk about fun stories. I talk about personal stories. I kind of relate it to whatever. And then at the end, I try to wrap it up about what it means and what it applies to me. This episode, we're not going to be doing cold open. We're not going to be doing any of that. And we're in a different corner of my room. I'm in my reading corner if you're watching on video. And this is where I typically read with a lamp on, and it's very cozy. And I started journaling here. I do a lot of songwriting here, like my guitar is across the corner. So it's a very safe place in this room because we're going to be talking about a topic and a subject that in some kind of way has really governed a lot of my life and a lot of my life experience. And in some ways I'm very grateful, and in some ways it really hurts. And I just like this entire time. So today we're going to be talking about grief, and I have been thinking or wanting to do, or just like this idea of this episode has just been placed on my conscience for it's been well over a year. Like before I even started the podcast, like back when I used to post which unbeknownst to me were like precursors to the podcast, I would post like little like clips of what I was thinking. So like the art of vulnerability, talking about my relationship with hair, my relationship with the idea of dreams, like just little thought pieces and think pieces. Before I even knew I really wanted to do a podcast, I really wanted to do one on grief and talking about my experience with grief and what I've learned, because I truly believe that somebody could listen and learn a lot from it. But I always shied away from it. And I think this comes back to my relationship with vulnerability is I hate feeling or looking vulnerable. I hate feeling this idea that people feel pity for me for whatever I've experienced or anything. It drives me nuts. Like I just like that feeling where I have somebody just looking at me and going, oh, like I'm some pet. Like literally, I don't know if it's Nigerian pride. I do not know what it is, but it drives me absolutely insane. And so I think there was a large element of pride when avoiding to do this episode. And I also recognize that, okay, I'm going to be really laying my feelings, my thoughts, my processes, my experiences out on the table, because another thing that was like very apparent when I was thinking, okay, I wanted to do a video about this, I want to do a video about this, then I made the podcast, I want to do a podcast episode about it, I want to do a podcast episode about it, was that there's only one way I feel like I could truly do this topic currently, and it's by telling my story. And in podcast episodes, I kind of do talk about my life a little bit. I allude to little pieces, but it's never the topic of a podcast. It's never like, this is the main thing. It's usually just like a little fun story. It's an anecdote. It's just something that I feel very comfortable with sharing, because I feel at the end of the day, I'm very honest to a fault. Like I will tell you how I feel and I will tell you what's going on, but at the same time, I'm very private, specifically with how I feel. So I just understood very like intrinsically that doing this is like stepping over like a boundary that I don't think I'll ever get back. But I don't know. I feel like after graduating and after speaking to a couple of people and recognizing the fact that this is something that we're going to have to deal with more and more and more the older we get. And I have been in a very unique position where I've experienced such a profound loss at such an early age, and having to go through that experience in teenage life and learn things. And I just don't know. I just feel like whether you believe in God or not, whether you believe in the universe, whatever, because I believe in God, like I just feel like an uncanny sense of duty to like just kind of talk about my story, talk about my journey and how I've healed, and I'm trying to heal how it affects me, because I know there will be at least one person at one point in time that will either listen to a clip or listen to the full episode and be able to gain something so profound from it. Without further ado, welcome geniuses to this very personal episode of Female Genius.
Female Genius.
When I was 12 going on 13, my mom passed away from cancer. And I felt like the best way to start this story is to kind of give you an image of the type of person like my mother was. I always tell my friends and I tell my little cousins and I tell like everybody, like, I aim in life to be kind but not nice. And that is genuinely the definition of the type of person my mother was. She was so like larger than life. Like, she was so unashamedly herself. She would fill up every room she went into with like so much light and laughter. But also she was so honest. She was so honest to almost to the point where it was slightly infuriating. Her opinions on everything, like, it was running joke because she was such a neat freak, which is crazy because if I turn around the camera, you saw my room. Like, I'm not a neat person. I'm a clean person. Like, you know, there's no like dirt on the ground. Like, my counters are clean. Like, I don't have moldy cups and like I shower twice a day. I'm a clean person, but I'm not a neat person. Like, my brain, my space reflects my brain. So there's like books on the floor and there's like papers here and there, just like very ENTP. Like, I should do an episode on MBTI types because the way I quote them is like how people quote star signs. That is how I quote MBTI types. But I feel like if my mom ever did the MBTI like quiz, we would be very, very similar, because we were very, very similar as people. But she was like genuinely larger than life, so funny, so honest. And she would like, it was so honest to the point where she would go to her friend's house and she'd just be looking around and she'd be like, Auntie Busola, your house is so dead. See, I could never live here. Like she was just so honest. So you always knew where you stood with her and you always knew her opinion. But when I tell you, she was the most kind and empathetic and loving person, and every single person who had the pleasure of meeting her and interacting with her would tell you that. It was like, she was the type of friend that you would call when you needed somebody to depend on, whether you needed somewhere to stay, whether you needed somebody to talk to, whether you just needed help or a shoulder to cry on. Despite the fact that she was so honest, sometimes to the point of rudeness, she was just so dependable. She had this thing, and I don't know if this is a genetic trait because I kind of have it too, but she just never forgets a birthday. Like, you can tell her a birthday once and she will never forget it. And I kind of have that trait too. And so it would be like 2-3 doors down, we have like our next door neighbor. Our next door neighbor, I don't even know the next door neighbor's name. And I've still been living in the same place ages. And like, she will remember and she'll buy the next door neighbor a gift. She's like always giving out foods, like our neighbors and stuff. She was just like, every time you met her, you were always like, oh my God, she is such a lovely and sincere and kind human being. But you cannot walk all over her. Like, she does not put up with nonsense. She was kind to the world and she was kind to herself. Like, she was the perfect example of the love in which I'm going to show myself will allow me to pour my cup into other people. And because she loved herself so much, she appreciated who she was as a person, both inside and out, because she was fashionable to a T. She loved fashion. She loved designer clothes. She loved perfume. She loved smelling nice. She loved looking nice. And so that just emanated into her wanting the people around her to love themselves as much as she loved them. And I think that is the type of person that she was. And but it's really funny because as a child and like growing up and like maybe like preteen years, we did not get along. Like, we clashed. And I genuinely think it's because we were both too very honest. It's kind of weird because I feel like I took her, like, arguably some of her best traits, but you can't have two hyper honest, two very headstrong people in like one household because it's like constant battle. And she would want one thing and I'd give my opinion. Even very young, I was like very opinionated and I was very independent. And she was just kind of like, why don't you agree with me? I'm your mom. Like, and I'm like, but you have to make it make sense to me. And I was like that from young and it drove her nuts. And one thing that I always remembered was how much she would, now we call it like positive affirmation, but obviously when I was a kid, like, don't call them positive affirmations, but how much she like encouraged me to be so loving and of myself and this idea of self-love. Like, I'd get my hair done and she'd be like, I hope you know you're beautiful. Don't you know you're beautiful? Let me take a photo of you. It'd be my birthday and she'd be like, okay, how are you going to treat yourself? How are you going to do this to yourself? I remember one day, I have such weird, like distinct, like sharp memories. I must have been like 6 or 7. And I remember coming in one day from school, and I don't know why this thought was in my head, but I remember thinking like, damn, like I'm so ugly. And my mom, the look on her face, she looked so offended. And she was like, first of all, never ever in your life. Do you know how hard it was for me to bring you into this world? Do you know how beautiful my daughter is? That's crazy. Who made you think you're ugly? Let me tell you now, as long as you think you're beautiful, nobody else's opinions matter. Like, don't you dare say that ever again in my house. Never, ever, ever. Full stop. That's like the kind of energy that she brought. Anyway, she was officially diagnosed with cancer when I was going into year 7. And then she passed away when, like, December 16th, 2015. Again, never forget a date. And essentially, I had an essay. Me and 12-year-old self. I had an essay due on the Ebola pandemic for this program I was a part of in school the next day. Jesi had not started it. So I was doing this the night before, and then loads of people were showing up to my house. And I think from that point on, I had like that conscious, like in my back of my head, I was like, oh my God, like I'm so sure she's like, something really bad has happened. But I was like, even if something really bad happens, I need to finish this essay. And then my dad came, and then he was like, oh, like your mom has passed away, but we'll get through this together. He didn't say it like that, but, and then had loads of aunties being like, you know, Timothy, like you must be, Timothy is my Nigerian name, by the way. Timothy, like you must be so devastated. Come and give me a hug. And I remember like stone cold, like honestly borderline like psychopathic or something. I was kind of like, I'm fine, but I won't be fine if I don't finish this essay. And I remember all of these people in the house. My dad was crying, Lade was crying. Like all of these people were just had such heavy emotions around me. And my only way of like coping and dealing with it was to work. And that is, I think from that point on, I knew I was just like such a massive workaholic, because I was just like, I will hate myself even more if I just do not complete this essay. And I did that. And the next day I went to school, and I did not miss a single day of school. Even on the day of the funeral, like I went to school in the morning and then I went to the funeral. Like I was such a workaholic, and in some ways I really truly buried how I felt and how, I don't know, I just, in upon reflection, I kind of felt, especially around that time, that I didn't want my sadness to be the cause of somebody else's sadness. I don't want how I feel about this to be a burden on other people. And I'm also one of those people that it takes me a long time to process emotions. And so emotions don't hit me at once. They hit me like in phases. Like it takes time. Any emotion, sadness, excitement, happiness, joy, like even bloody crushes. Like it takes me a minute for me to like catch up with them. And especially because I was so young, I was like 12 or 13, and everybody had such intense emotions. And I just was very much like, I don't want to say it was a state of shell shock, but it was just very much like, I'm aware that I am sad, but I don't feel the sadness the way you are feeling it. And I just remember continuing with time, and people would make comments all the time, and my family members, my so-called friends at school, even one of the teachers was just kind of like you are a machine, like you must not have liked your mother that much, and you must not have cared for her that much if you're able to just continue life like that and continue on. And I just remember like this moment so significantly and so distinctly, where I was in Nigeria with my dad, and we were staying in my dad's best friend's house, and my dad's best friend's wife was really good friends with my mom, clearly, because, you know, besties for life. And I remember she saw me, she hugged me, she was like, oh, like, you know, make sure you eat whatever you want, feel comfortable. And she went away, and I heard her sobbing her eyes out, being like, I just can't look at her because she reminds me so much of what I lost. And that was such an internalized state for me, because I recognized that if I showed too intense of an emotion, if I showed an inch of the fact that this hurt me and I was struggling, I felt like at the time that people around me would hurt a lot more than I did. I was the thing that she had left behind. And I was so adamant. I remember as a teenager, it was just such a profound thing in my mind, and it was a massive like driver, like a massive motivation, that I just cannot absolutely let anybody turn around and say my mom didn't raise me right, and that, oh, you know, it's so unfortunate that her mom passed away, you know, her mom didn't have time to implement I wanted people to look at me and be like, wow, your mom must be so proud of you. You know what I mean? I didn't want to give anybody any inch of a doubt. And I think it manifested in my grades. I developed a really bad eating disorder. Like, I just dropped so much weight out of fear. Obviously, I think there was a health conscious part as well, where I was like scared of like, being unhealthy. But also I wanted people to see like, oh my God, like, she's exercising, she's doing well at school, she's smiling, she's learning how to play the piano, the flute. Like, she's such a well-rounded child. She's so amazing. She doesn't cause any trouble for her dad. Like, she's truly a blessing. Her mom would be so proud. Like, that specific compliment, quote unquote, was something I chased so much. And it's very interesting because now as an adult, I reflect a lot on grief and how grief manifests in different ways. And I feel like as a society, we have a very, 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 very specific idea of what grief looks like, and we always think about grief as being manifested in the most negative way and having the most negative result in the fact that, because this person's experiencing grief, they became a drug addict, they're screaming, they're crying, they're acting up, they're misbehaving. And all of these things are fair and they're valid and they are ways in which people are struggling. And I do not discount that. But it makes me so upset and so sad how grief in people who are so good at putting it together gets overlooked. And if you aren't screaming and crying and ripping your hair out, your grief cannot be validated. And I think because my grief or my form of grief was always looked down upon, I didn't know what to do because I was paralyzed, because I was like, this is really hurting me and nobody can see that it's hurting me. And I would self-isolate, but everybody was like, oh, it's because she's being so studious, because she's so working hard. And it was just so weird how people would just overlook these forms of grief. But I guess my message to you is that there are multiple different ways to grieve, and there are multiple different ways in which grief manifests itself. And so if you feel like that emotion, that feeling, that heaviness, and it's struggling, and I think there's one like metaphor, I can't remember who told this, maybe I made it up myself, because I am, of course, a genius. That is like when you bleed, you can't control the direction in which the blood flows.
Female genius.
I was going through a couple of my diary entries, and this was a diary entry I wrote on my birthday this year. And on my birthday this year, Ariana Grande dropped Eternal Sunshine. And I remember listening to the album, and I got to the end of the album, and for me personally, like, I don't know if this is the same for other people, but I've spoken about on this podcast, I feel music so intensely. And I don't know whether it's because I'm just not the type of person to outwardly like express my emotions and like show them. Like, I'm not the type of person who like cries. I'm just not very expressive when it comes to my emotions. Like, I'm not a drama queen, and it hurts me really bad because I know I have everything in me to be a drama queen. So for me, it was like whenever I would listen to music, I'd feel it. Like, I'd feel it. I can't describe it, but it'd be like different songs give me different feelings. It's almost like synesthesia, but not synesthesia. It's like different songs like land in different places, or it's my stomach, or like my heart, my chest, my head. Like, it's a physical feeling whenever I feel music. And so a song makes a feeling sit in a certain way. And sometimes it's not even the lyrics of the song. Sometimes it's just the sound of the song. Just very different things. And so I was like kind of processing, because there was the specific song, We Can't Be Friends, sat in a very similar place to where like my grief so long sat. And it was very interesting to me because I was like, the song is so beautiful. And it was like, I'll wait for your love, me and my truth, we sit in silence. Like all of these lyrics, and they would just land and sit in that same place. And I remember sitting and just trying to reflect. And I remember thinking about this idea of pain. And for me personally, after my mum passed away, through many, many moments of my life, like moments when I was supposed to be happy, GCSE results day, my birthday, getting into Cambridge, all of these moments, I just remember not allowing myself to feel as happy as I possibly could. And every single time I felt a sense of elation or like joy or like, pride in myself, I would allow the grief to come in. Like it's kind of like a gate. Like I would open the gate. I'd be like, oh my God, I can't feel too happy. Let me open the grief and the pain. And it almost became like an act of like self-flagellation. If you don't know what self-flagellation is, I'm not sure where this comes from because I heard it on a Simpsons episode. So this might actually not be accurate, but isn't it like the thing that like during religious times when people were suffering, no, when people had done something that they had considered a sin and they were so ashamed of their sin that they literally like whipped themselves. So it was like a form of self-harm. But I would do like emotional self-flagellation anytime I felt happy, anytime I felt a moment of joy, anytime I felt a moment of success or anything. I would self-flagellate myself by unlocking that feeling of grief. And it was just this idea that came to me, became so closely associated with maintaining the memory of my mom. As much as it was hard work and trying to create a life for myself that I felt like she would be proud of, which is very warped in a way because I know now as I sit and reflect, and after having conversations, all my mom would want was for me to be happy. And if she had seen, you know, some of the things I had done in her name to make her proud, I think she would be so upset at me. But that's besides the point. Because again, grief looks different and that's something we have to acknowledge. And because I just couldn't unlock that grief in the way society thought was acceptable, the way other people did, I just would like self-flagellate. I was like, hey, you can't be happy because if you're too happy, then, you know, you're not respecting your mother's memory. And this idea of pain became so closely linked with this idea of my mom's memory. And I just felt like the only way to keep my mom's memory alive, and my only way to, you know, not forget her, was to constantly always feel underlying, like it would always be like a little, like a buzz, like a fucking mosquito in my ear, like always like underlying just the whole time in every happy moment, any moment I felt joy or pride, or it was with somebody that I really loved, or like with a friend, or I could feel myself like, you know, developing feelings for somebody, like romantically, whatever it was. It'd just be this low-lying thing, come up and come down, come up, but come down, but never turn off. And actually sitting down and talking to a therapist about this was this understanding of, oh wow, I don't know. I have not processed this grief. I do not know what to do with this emotion. And it sits there. And what's really interesting is we've probably heard of this idea that grief is love preserving. And this idea of grief and the sadness is because you have all of this love for this person, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. And there's this scene, I think in Avatar The Last Airbender. I quote Avatar The Last Airbender like it's a religious text. And it's low-key a little bit concerning, but also because I'm just currently watching it and I'm watching it very deeply because I want to do an episode on it. So now it's just phenomenal, 10 out of 10. But our Uncle Ira says like love is an energy. And so when grief is love preserving and you just don't have anywhere to direct it, that energy is going to sit and it's going to marinate in you. And I think a very important part of processing grief and getting over loss and trying to heal from that journey, and something that my first therapist, Shelley, she said to me was that you need to find a way to let all of this energy out and don't let it sit with you. Because what you've just been doing for the past 3, 4, 5 years is letting it sit with you and let it burn you from the inside out. And you're robbing yourself from the fulfillment and the beautiful kaleidoscope that is life by, you know, putting, you know, grey tinted glasses on it. She was like, how could you direct that energy? How could you find a way to process this love? And she said, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to always feel good, right? And that's the thing. Like, love doesn't always feel good. The act of loving someone isn't always, you know, butterflies and rainbows and cute, right? And you're sitting on a lot of energy, right? Like whatever you're going to tap out, it's going to gush out, probably not very nicely. And then it's going to become steady, and you're going to find ways to do this. And the way I began processing this was I would actually write letters, and I would literally do Dear Mom, and I would write a letter about how I was feeling, what was going on that day, what was going on in my life, what was going on in my siblings' life, what was going on in my dad's life. And I still have them and I read them back sometimes, and just finding that way to not almost communicate, but to find a way to direct that love and that feeling in a way that was very positive and a way that was very healthy was so healing to me. And I used to do the letters every day, and then every day became every week came every month, and then now I only write them on special occasions like her birthday, my birthday, you know, there's little things like that. And I was talking to my grief. I wasn't necessarily talking to my mom because she couldn't read this, but I was talking to my grief. I was having this conversation, and yeah, I was talking about my day, but deep down I was talking about how I was feeling, you know, what I felt, why I felt it. And I was having this conversation with it and allowing it to process, to feel what I feel, to write what my grief, like what people can sometimes get out through crying and through feeling. I was getting it out through writing. And I also love songs. I love music. I told you music's very powerful for me. And so I wrote a lot of songs. It's very interesting because the genre of songs is very interesting because some of them are like rock songs, but a lot of them were ballads. And there was one song I wrote, I think I was like 16, and I wrote it for a school band, and I wrote it under the guise of a crush. So a lot of it sounds a little, when you like, I'm not gonna bust out singing, but when I read back or I think about the lyrics, it sounded very crushed, like, oh, like I was speaking to love, like to everybody that I had written the song for the band, and they were like, oh, so is this about a crush? Like, is this about a guy you like? But in general, it was more about this idea of, I just want to hear my mom say she loves me one more time, and having the ability to express that through song and to turn it into something so beautiful for people to enjoy, to dance to add harmonies, for people to add their own creative spin on it was so amazing and so beautiful for me. And so when it comes to processing grief, and I guess through telling my story, the one thing that I have learned is that grief does not have to look in one way. And love is an energy that continuously flows around us, right? And we have to direct it somewhere. And so if you have recently lost someone, or, you know, maybe you'll remember this like in a few years' time when unfortunately you do, because it's an inevitable part of life, but is this idea of where can this energy and this love be directed? I remember seeing on Reddit, because, you know, I reddited the topic of grief, even when I did this episode. I remember seeing on Reddit him and his partner with the cycle together, and they would always go for this specific cycle route, and his partner passed away, and, you know, it really hurt him, and he was really struggling, and he just couldn't get into other relationships and whatnot, because again, as much as grief is like love preserving and it feels great to love and have missed somebody, that pain can sometimes warp itself and kind of suck other energies of your life and other love in your life, in the same way that pain and that grief that was sitting there and sucking, you know, my happiness, that was sucking his ability to form romantic connections. And he one day decided, you know, 2, 3, 4 years later after his partners left, that he said, okay, I'm gonna do that cycle that we used to do together. And he did. And he did it every single weekend. And he still goes and does that cycle. In fact, now he's like remarried, and he takes his new partner and his kids that he now has with his partner on that cycle. And he's like, I am sharing something that brought me so much joy with somebody I loved, and I'm sharing it with other people. And this idea of redistributing this energy and this love without soiling her memory, without making myself feel bad, without, you know, self-flagellating myself, I can allow this love I have for this person to turn into something beautiful. So yeah, if you are struggling with grief, I know how bad it hurts. Can you not see how this episode I've made the least jokes possible, and I've been trying to hold myself back from crying? And next 2 episodes, final 2 episodes of this season, are definitely going to be a lot more fun and a lot more uplifting, a little bit less genius and a little bit more crazy. I have a couple special guests coming for next episode. I'm absolutely fucking terrified of what they're going to do to me and how they are going to embarrass me on this episode. But without further ado, I love you guys so much, and I hope that the story helps, and I will see you guys next week on Female Genius. Goodbye, guys.
Female Genius.